Hello, listener. Welcome to the latest edition of the Wiggly Podcast, nonetheless. And yes, indeed, Heather is here, but she's chosen not to introduce this show. But she would like me to talk a little bit about what's been going on last week. Now, interestingly, I did email Heather because I don't necessarily get invited to come along to these podcasts. I have to sort of assume that I may be asked 12 hours beforehand. So I tried to plan ahead and email Heather to say, would you like me to come across and help out this week? And the reply I had last week was, sorry, Rich, we can't do a podcast this week because we've got our new system in place and it's working fabulously, but we're all a bit inundated.
Now, hang on, technically that's 2 weeks ago, because this is not next week, it's the week after.
Just say a couple of weeks ago.
Where was I? So what am I saying? That we didn't do a podcast last week because?
We did do one, we just done it.
Right, okay.
So it's a couple of weeks ago.
What we've just done is next week's. This one is the week after.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
If you say you didn't have one last week, they'll say, yes, we did.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I didn't come.
What did I get to then?
Tell you what.
Start again.
No, I can't get it into my... I can't place it.
His face is...
Because I'm thinking, where the hell am I now then?
Do we pay this numpty?
Where...
Hopefully not.
7 days
What
a week.
Sarah would call a blonde moment. It's a blonde moment, and I sometimes call it... Hello, listener. Welcome to the latest version of the Wiggly Podcast.
Woo-hoo!
Nonetheless, and the reason that I'm introducing this week's show is not just because Heather isn't here. Heather is suggesting that someone else introduce the show, and given that Phil, who is equally here, sat beside me, is so boring that it might mean that people turn the show off before they start to listen, I'm introducing it.
At least
Goodbye,
Farmer
listener.
Phil
Thanks
can
for tuning
successfully
in.
count to 7 twice in a row.
Now, the reason why you didn't have a show from us 2 weeks ago now was that because things were happening in the Wiggly office.
Yes.
And there's a new system being put into place. Now, you will realise that I spent somewhere in the region of the best part of 4 years working in that office, and that since I started, we were always considering having a new system put into place, because, you know, the old one caused a few problems along the way.
Shall I shoot him?
Yeah.
Or shall you?
Yeah.
For various
Oh, my
reasons,
God.
it didn't happen. And consequently, there is a little hiatus that the new system is now in place. Is that right?
Oh, that will do, I suppose. I'd like to say that in 1998, in July, my theory is this, right? There's a bunch of companies out there that set you up with very expensive hardware and very expensive software, and they don't let you think or spec the system well, and once you've got into it, you're stuck forever. And I would like to know how many small business out there have got into this terrible vicious circle, and what happened to us. I know it's going back a bit, but I'm still bitter about it.
I can tell.
Was in 1998.
I think the listener might be able to pick up on that tone.
Which is a good, 12 years ago, a horrid company came and tried to install a system, and we were rescued from it by our dear Michael, who put in place instantly, almost, a little system that just worked for us a treat. And for all those years after that, we looked for something else and searched for it and came close to putting it in, and on one occasion we spec'd it completely wrong, and on another occasion we had another company in who just about drove us mad. In fact, I won't mention his name, but it was to do with a ghost.
I think that's vague enough. That ghost on the telly. And he took me around the corner of a show and he threatened me and said that we were going to have this system and he was going to put it in and we were going to pay the £43,000. Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, since then we've been searching, and I met Doug Richard, one of the old dragons at the British Library, and he mentioned that you could now get this thing on the cloud, which is out there somewhere. I don't know how it works. And we met two lovely lads called Chris and Andrew, and they've come along and they've put this system in, and the great thing is it wasn't too expensive,
right.
And they're called Pearl Software, and we paid for it beautifully, so by the month with a little upfront sum, with some money and 5 pairs of goat socks. And that suits us right well.
Absolutely fine, yeah. So was the money less than the worth of the goat socks?
Don't tell them. But yes, but actually we've gone and, you know, because we were pleased with it, we've actually given them 2 extra pairs of goat socks for their ladies.
Oh, that's very
and
decent.
I've had an email in to say that the one of them's date, I won't mention which, went very well.
Yeah.
And he gave her the flowers and the goat socks, and he noticed that she immediately had them on, the
Right.
goat socks. So
There you are,
I
you
think
see.
it's been a
Yeah,
success.
well, it's a winner.
So without wishing to be in any way smug, what it will mean for you, dear listener, is that we'll know if we've got it.
Right.
That's the key thing.
That's good, isn't it?
We'll now know, hopefully, almost definitely know, that we've got whatever it is you want. So it's lovely. And I know Michael's pleased because he's got rid of us going on about it.
The all-encompassing brilliance that is Michael Maloney. What does he think about it?
I think he's pleased that we've finally got it sorted. He nods sagely. And I know Mary will be, because the only alternative was that we locked him in a room for 100 years and he came out with it, and Mary couldn't stand that happening because he would have been driven balmy. Because he can do it, but we need him for other more important things. Yeah. And the thing is, so just to say thank you to Pearl Software for rescuing us. The girls are happy, the florists are happy. Little moment in the warehouse, but apart from that, it's all sorted. No problem. Rach is happy, so hopefully that will be that. This week's show, we're going out to the cows. I want to know about Richard's fishing.
Right. Do I get a chance to talk about fishing then?
Not for long.
Okay.
Not in the same length of time that you talked about strategic reviews of pilot schemes that hopefully we cut out completely.
Do I get a specified amount of time to talk about fishing?
One breath.
Yes. You've got 5 minutes from now, but they're all to be answered my questions, because I need to know stuff.
Right.
Where are you going fishing today?
Well, I'm going to go for a moment just to catch bait.
And have you got permission?
So I have got permission. I have got permission. Yes. In fact, I don't fish anywhere anymore where I haven't got permission to, and that's a symptom of age. In fact, I was thinking when I was driving over today, I thought, gosh, my life has suddenly become very conventional and law-abiding. I need to do something very dodgy, and it did occur to me robbing a bank and stuff like that. But the relative responsibilities I have, as far as a wife and things like that are concerned, it's perhaps not such a good idea. But you know,
Rich, you turned up in a charabang with 2 drums in the back that looked like if they hit you on the head, you would automatically die.
I think Peugeot would be
a trailer which was overloaded with large pieces of what looked like stolen wood.
Yeah, no, not stolen. No, absolutely not stolen. I buy those from a friend of mine called Say It With Wood. Actually, a local couple that work in Herefordshire that coppice a lot of chestnut, and I buy a lot of my chestnut from them for various schools work and things like that, but they equally sell firewood, so I bought some from them. Originally I bought some oak to make stepping stones with, and there was some left over. My Uncle Jim, who's now 88, that lives up in Paris, where I'm going after we finished here today to do some worky-like stuff. I can go and see Uncle Jim as well, though, and drop him in some firewood, because he'd be thrilled with that. And it's ash, so he can burn it green, because he hasn't got any stored. So it's all a bit of a time and motion study, and I'm purely going fishing just to catch some...
3 minutes left on fishing.
He's never done a time and motion study in his...
He has. He's been doing one today.
He does not understand the meaning of the word.
I don't believe you, me. I know more than most, I think you'll find. But yeah, no, fishing stuff. And I think possibly one thing, actually, we did talk about a while ago, is getting Dan Jeffries in, Tam's husband, to talk about rod building and stuff like that. So we should do that at some stage.
Have you not done that?
He's a brilliant bloke. Well, I did, but unfortunately, I think it was about 3 weeks ago when we thought we hadn't got any material. I asked Dan whether or not he'd like to come along, and he couldn't. So, which is why, obviously you didn't hear anything about that. But Thursdays, I think, are essentially a little bit difficult for him. But anyway, he would love to come. He would love to come. And Dan,
what bait are you catching?
What bait? Oh, just some live baits for pike fishing.
What's live bait?
Live fish. To go for fishing, bleak. To go
stolen
pike fishing
out of
with.
my pond.
Right.
Yeah, it's not your pond, is it? I know there's this kind of feudal kind of aura about you, all things kind of Preston on Wye-like, but the realities are you guys aren't the custodians of that pond, and I'm able to drop in under radar, having got permission from said custodians, and extrapolate a few little silver fishies that I can use for bait.
Ice. That's all I want to know. So the pond's iced over.
Yeah.
When you chuck your thing in...
Over, 'cause I haven't seen it.
Well, it seems icy to me. When you chuck your thing in...
Yeah.
Yes, it sort of goes hard on the top. That's when it's icy.
How is it going to work?
We years ago, when I was a kid, we used to fish these ponds. And they were fantastic for pike fishing. We used to go there under radar, and we used to chuck in the middle of massive great pheasant shooting estate. We used to chuck in, just chuck in logs, smash the ice, and then you could chuck in your pike bait in amongst these broken rafts of ice, and get pike. And we caught pike as well out of there, which is fantastic. And recently, I went up to Bilth on the upper reaches of the Wye, grayling fishing. And I was trotting down, using a stick float, trotting down
What's a stick float?
It's a float that you use for fishing in relatively strong currents in the river, and it has a good level of buoyancy in its topper half and then a relatively skinny stem below it. It means you control the bait. So what you're doing is the bait is lying directly under the float, and it's wafting up seductively in front of any fishies that are living in the stream.
Hang on. So the float is on the wire or on the line.
The float is the
and
wire
then
is
the
part
bait
of
is so far from the float.
Yeah.
Depending on what fish
Depending
you're
on the
trying
depth,
to catch.
The depth of the river and the time of year.
I always
and things
wondered
like
that.
Yeah. It depends on several things. But that was fun because the river, that was it's a while since I've been fishing now. It was several weeks ago, and the river had frozen practically 2/3 of the way across, i.e. a third on one side, a third on the other. So in the middle there's this long unfrozen channel. And unfortunately, I had to walk well upstream to present my bait to where the fish were, about 60 yards. So I was trotting all the way downstream, and the tip of the float was now becoming just about visible, and it would dip and poof, a fishy on. And of course, I was bringing the fish up against this ice floe, and the float is just bouncing along the edge of the ice floe as the fish is kind of dipping and diving underneath these great big rafts of ice. But I caught about 15 or 20 nice juicy grayling. Took them home. I've eaten most of them actually by now, and we smoked a few and scoffed a few. But yeah, that's gorgeous. Those fish. And grayling are one of the few fish that still feed fairly voraciously in the winter time.
When this ice is over top of the pond, which is my original question, what's the fish thinking? Because it must be quite odd that up above...
I wish I could answer that question. If only I knew.
Well,
I
ask that question more often, because he seems to have silenced him.
If I could just get into that fish's brain, my whole world would be so much better. But gosh, I don't know. I've got no idea. I imagine there would be a muffling effect, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
If you're below the ice, and there's obviously that kind of muffling effect. It'd be interesting. I suppose the best thing to do would be to ask a diver that goes and films krill underneath the ice sheets of Greenland or something like that, and they'd have a better idea of the kind of acoustic qualities of.
But it is a fair shout to think that a cold fish doesn't do much anyway, does it? It just they slow down as
they do slow down dramatically. Yeah, and they do. And interestingly, pond conservation, the charity Pond Conservation, they have recently speculated that wildlife fares better underneath ice in a pond if you leave the ice and don't attempt to break it or release some of the gases that form below it. I'm not entirely sure that's the case, because surely it would very much depend on the depth of the pond, the surface area, so on and so forth. It's a bit suspect.
There's a report out today about hibernating animals benefiting greatly from these really cold spells that we've got, because obviously they don't wake up when it's a bit warm and there's no diseases and all that sort of thing.
Sure. And it has been a cold winter, hasn't it? And it would make sense that that's the case. Because
they mentioned Red Admiral.
Red Admirals. You've got Valentine's on the mind, haven't you?
They mentioned Red Admirals and Hoggies. Farmer Phil, have you got a Wiggly review? If you've got time to pop one up, go to iTunes and pop one up, and we might read it out. After all, we've read out every other.
Well, there's a couple of reviews. Here's another of the latest ones. The Good Life in Real Life, 5 stars. And this is from Ross, 99 Station Street, up there in Burton-on-Trent. Where
nice restaurant.
I just happen to know that he
good
runs
steak.
A nice restaurant. Good steak, good boy. I've listened to the Wiggly podcast for some time now, and each episode is a joy in itself. The key to its success are the personalities and the subjects chosen for each week. Farmer Phil comes out with clear facts and figures based on his research and also from solid experience of what can really work in the country. Ricardo has the idealistic view and a penchant for ogling, but I suspect he would be like a dog chasing a car and wouldn't know what to do if he caught one. Heather seems to act as referee at times, but suspect that she's really poking both Phil and Richard with a stick in one hand.
I certainly am not poking Richard.
To start the row, and a nice beer in the other. Some of the topics that are discussed can be controversial and a bit heated at times, but they tend to be balanced, and you often get the aha moment when the penny drops. On other weeks, it can be a documentary or interview type programme, but always something to take home. Well done, keep up the good work.
Email in hot news from Preston on Wye. Anyone for tennis coaching? Let us know if you're interested. Email Pam. Thank you. Now, Podchef says, because obviously we need tennis coaching this year. Podchef says, you mentioned the white pheasant being shot.
Yes.
Which I had a bit of a row about afterwards as well, because I thought, after all we've heard about conservation, and really it's about sport and betting and blokey things, and he says, just a minute, isn't the payment for the white pheasant to go to the gamekeeper, and isn't that how the gamekeeper is benefiting from not being paid properly, etc.?
Well, that's what I said to you, that traditionally it was another way that the gamekeeper earned himself a few extra shillings. Podchef also made the point that you probably didn't want the white pheasant to stay there. You didn't want too many white pheasants, and that's probably a fair shout as well.
Oh, I see.
But the origins of it, in all the years I've been involved, it has always been that little perk for the gamekeeper. The pheasants will go over the guns. The white one is just another pheasant. It just happens to be white. But it is right that you wouldn't want too many of them, because that would be pointless then.
We've done a brilliant cover for the latest Wiggly catalogue, Rich. Right. Well, I think it's brilliant because it was my idea, but Michael executed it. And you must look out for it, because it is a chicken in the Wiggly kitchen looking at an egg. And it's like the chicken or the egg, and it's going to come out at Easter, and I love it. And it's a light Sussex, and it's a white chicken against those colourful tiles. It's got its red thing. Yeah. And
red comb. That's what they call it. I was thinking then.
Because you know the Wiggly covers.
On the table though. When
it did. Yeah. There was a big chicken poop, but I put it in the can of worms.
Oh well, there you are.
The Wiggly catalogue covers do cause a bit of controversy. Right. There's a very famous...
Or even controversy.
Oh, sorry.
On the pronunciation again, Phil.
You say tomato and I say tomato. There's a very famous chap in the world of mail-order catalogues. He's like a squillion trillionaire. And he phoned up me and he said, I'm in the area, could I come round to your place and see what you do? And I thought... He's a squillion trillionaire with lots of catalogues that are very, very famous. Right. Not all of them what I would consider to be the best, but certainly very big volumes. Okay. I thought, why would he want to do that? So I said, well, why? I don't think, we're going to be able to give you much expertise. You're obviously much, much more successful than we are at catalogue marketing. Yeah. And he said, well, it was just that I wanted to come and see the faces behind the people that would actually ever put a pig's bum on the front of their mail order catalogue.
Right.
I thought,
Is that right?
well, I'll be. So I said, no. And so this time I'm hoping he's going to phone up and say, did you really have that chicken in your kitchen doing a poop looking at the egg? And I can say, yes,
Right.
you did.
Oh, there you are. There you are.
Phosphate? Is there a
Phosphates.
problem?
There's going to be limited supply of phosphates, and some people think that we're going to run out of mineable phosphates within the next sort of few years, possibly as few as 5.
Why do you need it?
Phosphate is a substance that plants require for growth. It's an essential nutrient, and it's something that leaches out of the soil, and it's locked up within the soil. But the problem will come that if we can't dig any more out of the ground, we've essentially let it all go out into the sea. That's what's happened to it. That's
Can we
what it's
suck it back?
Well, I expect there are people trying to work it out, but the first problem is that the price of phosphate has gone through the roof, as has potash, which is another mined nutrient. There isn't such a shortage of potash, but it's all getting very expensive. And there's currently quite a lot of work being done. Phosphate is one of these substances that you put it in the soil and it's almost instantly locked up before the plant can get at it.
Right.
Because it's quite a reactive substance. And so a lot of the fertiliser that we've been putting on has not actually ever got to the plant. And there's quite a lot of work being done on different ways of formulating the phosphate or treating it to make it available to the plant for longer, thereby enabling us to use a lot less of it.
Yeah.
But it's a problem that is ongoing, and at the moment there isn't a huge number of solutions to it.
Right.
And it's one of those things that unless somebody stumbles across a big hole in the ground with a lot more to be dug out of it,
Which is unlikely.
which, well, it's possible. They keep finding reserves of these things,
Yeah.
but the problem then is transporting it all around the world, the devastation of the air, of the hole that you dig it out of, because these mines are not very environmentally friendly in many ways, and so it's potentially quite a serious problem.
Interesting stuff.
Rich, you've been out in the cowshed with Farmer Phil.
I have.
All
I have. It was all right. It's a while since I've been in that cowshed, and it did bring memories drifting back of a throng of people in this house, and a dimly lit, relatively warm compared to the outside cowshed some years ago. But we were talking about all things bove-like. Certainly one of Phil's favourite subjects, I feel.
Like cows, friendly old things.
Well, it's been a while since I've been in this cowshed, Phil. In fact, it's probably a couple of years, almost since the cowshed at night event.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you that's probably 4 or 5 years ago now.
God, time flies. But it's great to be back in. It's lovely to hear the chirping of the sparrows and the steam coming from all these boves' noses.
Yeah, it was a cold morning this morning, so that they're quite happy to be in here.
So what's going on? I mean, this is, I suppose, traditionally the time of year when you're plucking calves from the derrieres of all these beasts.
It's rather strange, actually, because we're suffering the hangover from the very wet harvest 2 years ago.
Right.
Because we've got very few calves, and the reason that we've got so few calves is that you remember about 12 months ago now we were having 1 or 2 problems with nutrition, and the cows weren't well, and we lost a few, and we didn't know what was wrong with them.
Yeah.
And it transpired that the reason that we were in problems was that the quality of fodder from the year before that we made in the summer was so poor, not that it was mouldy, but there was so little nutrition in it that we were essentially starving the thinner of the cattle.
Right.
Which was a fair tragedy. We had compensated for it, but not enough. But you can see the difference in their condition now, that they're sleek, they've got cover on them, but of course because they were thin, essentially, they didn't get in calf when we wanted them to.
It's important, isn't it? Yeah.
So now 2 years on, we're still suffering the hangover of a weather stroke mistake combination.
Right.
Over that time.
Okay.
But I'm not terribly unhappy in as much that March-born calves are easier to manage. You can get them out in the field, and that pneumonia isn't a problem.
Yeah.
And get them out on the grass.
How do they stick the cold? Sheep, I know, can tolerate incredibly cold. Lambs, incredibly kind of cold temperatures.
As an old vet once said to me, they are designed for outdoor use.
Right. Well, that's right. You wouldn't want to bring them in. That's
the thing about animals is, and cattle and sheep are the same, is that if you have a newborn animal outside, as long as they get a good dose of warm colostrum, they will stand the cold very well.
Right.
If there's something wrong, then the cold will catch up with them much quicker.
Yeah.
And from our point of view, by having them in these yards like this over the winter time, we can keep control of the situation. We can cope with anything that's not just quite right. Hopefully we can get the ventilation good enough in here so that we're not suffering from pneumonia problems, which, broadly speaking, we seem to get away with.
Okay, and we're stood on a huge mat, like a floating raft of straw, with the ingredients that the cows add to it over the period of time. But is that the best thing for them to bed down on, do you think?
I think it is, with care. I mean, obviously, running a deep litter system of straw, so that all that means is that we keep bringing fresh straw and putting it in on top, so it gradually builds up.
Are there alternatives? I mean, could you use something like that? Heather wondered whether or not you could use something like rubber matting, for instance. I mean, does that ever get used?
Probably not in the context of this sort of cattle, but certainly in dairy cows you can use rubber matting in cubicles, and some people use sand,
right,
and things like that. But a cubicle means that the cow can only be in one place, so that she will go and lie down in the cubicle, so that when she dumps or passes urine, that goes into the alleyway, so that she never dirties what she's lying on.
Right.
Whereas in this sort of more relaxed environment, obviously you're going to have to deal with the manure and litter on top of it. But the important management thing is that obviously this muck underneath our feet gets warm.
Right.
And as you let it get deeper, it'll get warmer.
Yeah. Sure.
And that can be a breeding ground for bugs. And so that the frequency of mucking out, which is essentially we just take it all out and start again.
How often?
We do it once halfway through the winter. So 2 muckings out for the year.
Okay.
Now, that is about right, but the timing of this mucking out is crucial. So we're going to muck out on Sunday and Monday now.
And it's a relatively big job as well, I should think. I mean, there's quite a volume of stuff under our feet.
We reckon we can shift about 800 tonnes of muck in a little under 2 days.
And what happens to it?
That goes out and it'll be stockpiled on my neighbour's farm, where it's rotted down, composted.
So an enormous composting, essentially.
A big pile of the proverbial. And then he'll spread that later on in the autumn. Right.
Okay, so it makes good use of this.
It's all used, and I think as the price of fertiliser goes up, the likelihood is that we will start to use more of it ourselves.
Right.
The reason we don't use it is because we don't want to contaminate our seed growing ground with the grains that have either gone through the cattle or might be in the straw.
I see.
So that's why we don't choose to use it. But if the price of fertiliser keeps going up, it is a resource.
It's an interesting thing, folks often say, how do you get such fantastic vegetables? Not necessarily to me, but I've heard people asking one another. But people say, it's because I put tons of muck on the garden. But often, exactly because of the reasons you've speculated, that people are loath to use muck because of the seeds that it does contain. You end up getting possibly more weeds in the garden, but I think on balance, because it's so
hopefully there aren't too many weed
seeds,
but from my point of view, I don't want the cereal seeds in the wrong
breed of cereal.
Anyway, come over here.
Let's have a look. I mean, can you tell how when a cow is likely to calf? I mean, what are the signs? Or presumably she's sort of rocking about and looking a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, obviously the first sign, we pregnancy test them, so we have got an idea of when they're due to calve.
Right.
Within 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
Now, obviously, when you look at a cow, you can see that they get bigger, just like a human does when they're pregnant. Now, as they approach calving, they're quite obviously larger.
Yeah.
Their udder starts to fill with milk.
Right.
And as you get really close to calving, their pin bones and their back end starts to relax.
Right.
And you'll see that their vulva gets more swollen, and you'll get a certain amount of slime and stuff like that.
Okay.
And that shows that you're within sort of a few days, perhaps a week of calving.
Yeah.
And then when you actually get to the point that you're trying to detect within the next few hours, what you're looking for is behavioural changes.
Right.
So instead of coming into her usual slot to feed, she might come in down the end.
Right.
Or when you come out and see her in the last thing at night, instead of being in the area of the yard, because they're very habitual, they'll probably go and lie in the same place more or less every night.
Right.
But she'll change. She'll go to the other end of the yard or something like that.
Okay.
And you can just pick up things that she might not be chewing the cud.
Just
She
things
might
that are slightly
be
out of character.
just looking a little bit uncomfortable, how they hold their tail.
Yeah.
They're all different, but it's just that little suggestion that, something's not quite right. And that's a fairly sure indication that within the next half dozen hours, action is to be had.
So when you see that, I mean, how often do you sort of come out and check to see whether the old girl needs a hand?
Depends on the cow, depends on her history. If it's a first calving heifer, I'll come and check it pretty regularly, every hour.
Yeah.
I want to be not very far away. The general rule of thumb is that once they start calving, if they haven't produced something sensible within an hour, then you ought to be looking at helping the job along somehow.
Okay.
But they are designed to do it on their own, and there is no reason that they can't, by and large.
Right.
It's usually something unfortunate that trips the job up. So the calf might be mispresented.
Yeah.
So it might have a leg back, it might be backwards altogether.
Right.
Now those are usually ones that you have to help, because if you don't, you have a dead cow and a dead calf.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, with heifers who are inexperienced, you might get the cow will push the calf out, but then she'll be so relieved she'll just sit there and the calf suffocates in the afterbirth at the other end.
Yeah, yeah.
Because she hasn't remembered or doesn't know that she's got to get up and turn around and lick it. And
right,
all.
okay.
It's just little things like that, but an experienced cow that has had several calves and knows what she's doing and all the rest of it, you'd be fairly confident to leave her a little bit longer and come and check her and just make sure that it's all right.
Right.
But here, I've got a calf in front of me.
Yeah, I see this beautiful little chap.
Now, I want you to tell me what is wrong
big
with that
brown
calf.
eyes. What's wrong with it?
Yeah, spot the error.
Doesn't seem to have a tail. Is that right?
That's spot on.
How did I see that? It's kind of peculiar. It's not got a tail.
No, and that's the second one in 20 odd years that we've had like that. It's not an injury.
Right.
It's just born with no tail.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's better.
But it's perfectly healthy. You can see it's dashing about.
Yeah, it seems perfectly bright.
Yeah.
Very happy. Very dark little calf as well.
By penguin.
What's that? Penguin. The penguin, of course, is the big.
He's Angus.
Aberdeen Angus.
And it's out of this MRI cow, so she's quite black as well, so that you're going to get a fairly black result out of it.
And she's very content. She's not particularly bothered that the calf is skipping around the shed with all the other cows.
The calf's old enough now that, she's got used to the idea the calf will come back to her. It's the sort of first week they get very maternal and possessive.
Right.
But once they're a bit more relaxed,
yeah.
She knows where it is. You can see her looking.
Yeah, it's just checking her.
But she just sort of thinks, well, it's all right. It's it's only old Fishborn, and he's no threat to anyone. So.
That's right. So they're scoffing this ryegrass hay. I mean, but presumably, do you have to give them any other kind of food supplements?
Yeah, well, they have a roll barley mix that we grow and mix here on the farm.
Oh, right.
Which is what gives them their hard food and energy and minerals.
Right.
And so we weigh that so that we know how much they're getting.
Right.
And that's where we can supplement the quality or lack of it in the grass seed straw. They have to have some supplement, it's just a question of how much. And the mistake we made last year was we knew how much straw they were eating in terms of weight, but what we hadn't bargained for was how little nutrition was in it.
Does the nutrition level fluctuate in the in the hay?
It does.
Right.
And so the good hay that smells sweet, I mean, this is good stuff, so it's got a bit of colour, it's got a little bit of green to it.
Yeah.
That'd be as good as hay, and they don't need so much, and that's why they look quite fit.
Right.
Last year, because the hay had been turned so many times, it had been rained and all the rest of it, it was washed out, which is a term, absolutely dead is how you'd understand that.
Yeah.
And so we put the figures in as if it was the base standard of cereal straw to eat, which is the lowest figure.
Right.
But it was obviously worse than that. It had got no energy left in it at all.
Right, so that's quite disappointing, really. For you must think,
It is. I mean, you think, oh, God, should I have spotted it? You can beat yourself up.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
I'll do that for you.
You'll do that for me. And we've learnt another lesson.
Yes.
And there's one thing, you won't find many farmers who'll tell you they know everything.
No,
you learn something.
Well, there
all
are a
the
few,
time.
but of course they don't. Like
yeah.
all of us, we don't.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm learning.
But that isn't
all
that the
time.
most wonderful thing as well? Just be taken by surprise occasionally, and
But it's pleasing to have recognised it, and I'm happy with the way that they look in general.
They do look very handsome. There's,
how
many animals are in this barn all told?
There are about 40, 45 in here altogether,
and they're incredibly calm, and they seem perfectly relaxed. They're not at all bothered by the fact that we're in here. They're just as if we're just part of the furniture.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's probably because they're essentially very used to you, aren't they? And
well, they are, but also,
trusting.
a relaxed cow is a cow that you can manage. If they're dancing around the place, charging around, then calves get injured. When I come in here at night, if I need to calve one, I don't want to be chasing it around for an hour and a half trying to catch up with it. I need to be able to walk up to it and deal with it.
Right.
So that I am from the school that I want my cattle quiet. I don't want them tame, and there is a difference. But I want them quiet and content. They'll eat properly then. They're happy, and then they're healthy.
Yeah.
And then we get into all the realms of all the other disease prevention. If you've got a cow that's stressed, she is wide open to disease.
Yeah.
More so than
I guess it's like anything, any animal husbandry. It's important to be proactive with the husbandry rather than reactive to any problems that can make them poorly.
Let's go and get back in the warm and see whether we can find where that heather is.
Just that.
Thanks for that, both. Just before we go, it's time for a Wiggly review.
Informative, inspiring and entertaining is podcast 210. 5 stars. By Boo Book.
I wasn't in that one.
Well, you're not?
Don't think so.
But it's all in Heather's absence, and with the punches edited out. Richard and Farmer Phil engaged in one of the many aspects of Wiggly Wiggler's podcast that I like, i.e. educating a townie like me in agricultural matters. I can rely on Richard to ask all the daft questions, and he does ask some daft questions, I tell you. I would ask, and then Farmer Phil tells it like it is. Hooray for WWBB.
What about me?
You weren't there.
What about, haven't they mentioned me?
Not much, no.
Right.
Oh dear.
A bit, sometimes.
Never mind.
Right. No problem. It doesn't affect me, obviously. Doesn't bother me at all. No problem at all. If you want to write a review up about Richard and Phil and you think I don't do anything, you carry on. Just get out there, do it. Doesn't upset me, there's no issue. I can get back to my day job, which is doing God knows what. Bye.
Bye. Bye from me.
That's very good. That's good. Yeah, perfect.